This presentation is going to look at factual storytelling and how you can borrow some of the tricks of fictional storytelling to make your story even more compelling. Why does this matter? Well, because nowadays if you're trying to get your message out, this is what you're up against. Any moment Twitter can go crazy because a horse has got stuck in a fence and been photobombed by a cow. In fact, when this story went on Twitter, this was the headline from the Huffington Post. Cow photobombs horse, we can all go home now. Which meant, from a journalist's point of view, this was all their audience were going to be talking about. It's useful to know how powerful story is. So let's go back to a problem that was posed by psychologists in 1974 called the Linda problem. Now, I want you to imagine, to picture, a woman called Linda in your mind. Here's what I'll tell you about Linda. She's 31 years old, single, outspoken and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with discrimination and social justice. She also participated in anti-nuclear demos. Now I want you to answer, which do you think is more probable? A. Linda works in a call centre, or B. Linda works in a call centre and is an active feminist blogger. So, A or B, which do you think is most probable? And a lot of people go for B. But if you think about it mathematically, if you imagine this is the pool of all adult women, and let's say this number of them work in call centres, and maybe this number of them are active feminist bloggers. Probably fewer of them, let's be honest. And this number here in the middle are ones who are working in call centres and active feminist bloggers. So if you chose B, you are thinking that Linda was more likely to be in this area than if you chose A, than a woman who worked in a call centre. Now if you are thinking about it from a point of view of which would you rather put your own money on in a bet, you may want to rethink and go for A, because numerically A is much more likely than B, because A is one thing and B is one thing and another. And yet, because we've had a story about Linda, we've had a story about her past and her time as a student, we imagine the ending of the story is going to somehow reflect the beginning, whereas in fact it may be completely different, we just don't know. So the story in this instance has kind of outweighed the probability, or has outweighed the statistics, has outweighed the maths. And this takes us to what one author calls the narrative fallacy. And the narrative fallacy, according to Nicholas Nassim Taleb, it said we have a limited ability to look at a sequence of facts without weaving an explanation into them. And that's in Taleb's book, The Black Swan. George Bernard Shaw said it's only through fiction that facts can be made instructive or even intelligible. So we need story to make sense of facts. This also lies behind why you sometimes hear people say, kind of in joke, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. So what does story need to have? Well, if you remember back to your very early days in school, you were told every story has a beginning, a middle and an end. Of course, when we were at school, when we were children, stories always began once upon a time. As professional storytellers, I suggest that stories begin with a different line. And stories begin with, hey guys, I've got a great story. And when you say that, you have bought yourself about 10 seconds of attention from either your audience or your editor or your colleagues to say, okay, what's your great story? So, in the beginning was the word, and the word was irony. Now, irony you can define as a state of affairs that seems deliberately contrary to what you expect. An irony, for example, is the fact that the founder of Match.com lost his girlfriend to a man she met on Match.com. So it's ironic because we go on Match.com to find love, not lose love. It's also ironic because the guy who founded Match.com is meant to be in a position of power, and he's not meant to be the loser, so it's doubly ironic. If you think of irony as the difference between what is and what ought to be, but why does this matter? According to a very famous Hollywood scriptwriter, irony is the hook that gets our attention. So if you think of this, man hunts giant shark. Okay, right, that's quite interesting. Now add a layer of irony. Tough New York cop who is terrified of water hunts giant shark in a tiny boat. Because Chief Brody in Jaws, for it is Jaws we're talking about, Chief Brody is frightened of water. Now add another layer, this time of emotion. Tough New York cop who is terrified of water hunts giant shark in a tiny boat to protect the family and community he loves. You've got not necessarily the beginning line of the story, but you've got the line that's going to get us interested in the story. You've got the line that's going to make us ask, what happens next? And Blake Schneider, who highlighted this in his book on script writing, said that his favourite films all have this. So Jaws has this irony about the tough cop afraid of water. In Die Hard, Bruce Willis is off duty visiting his estranged wife when he comes across the terrorists. Off-duty cops not meant to be fighting crime. And in a film like Pretty Woman, Richard Gere is paying for sex and not meant to fall in love, but he does. Irony gets my attention, says Blake Schneider. It's emotionally intriguing, like an itch you have to scratch. So, when we think about the stories we want to tell, I'm going to suggest you try this. The downloadable worksheet you'll find on the website, where you start off by saying, okay, who's the actor? What's the world? Where are we? Who are we with in this story? What's the emotion? What's at stake? And then, where's the irony? So where is the difference between what is and what ought to be? And when you try and sum that up, you say, okay, this is the story of someone doing something somewhere for some reason, even though, and then there's the irony, or despite the fact that, and then the irony. And what I'll suggest to you is that makes your story that bit more irresistible. And people will say, okay, tell me more. And then you've got them. You've got their attention. So that's how you can use irony and emotion to get people hooked at the beginning of the story. Let's talk now about the middle. And before we go on, it'll help to watch this short clip about snakes chasing iguanas.